In this episode of 427 Motorsports, I'm going to get a little bit more in depth about the TDI conversion. And a bit of a heads up, this is going to get a little bit nerdy. Okay, so two things I want to say first. If I look to the right a few times, it's because for the first time ever in doing a video, I've kind of written a bit of a script because there's some info I don't want to leave out for this because it's all pretty important. And I kind of look a wee bit homeless still at the minute, but that's because I, don't really care. I've seen like YouTube videos where these guys that go into a garage and they're all really smartly dressed in like skinny jeans and check shirts and baseball caps, and it's like, you do not look like you actually have worked in a garage before. Nobody goes into their garage dressed like they're going on a night out and they're all perfectly trimmed and all. No, enough of that. Bloody hipsters. That was a bit of a rant. Okay, so in this video I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about what I'm actually doing here. Now, the weather unfortunately has been a wee bit which has meant that I haven't really been able to do very much because it's outside. That's going to change because I will thankfully be taking it into the shed, but for now, when there's days like this, I just kind of have to sit and stare out the window like a wife from World War I waiting for her husband to come home. So I thought I'd go a little bit more in depth about what I'm doing. So with this TDI swap, there are realistically a couple of ways that you can do this. What you really want, for easiness sake, you can put whatever you want in it. I would love to see somebody put like a Jag engine in a Golf or something just for a laugh, But realistically, for handiness sake, what you want is either an AHU or a 1Z. Others may have slightly more wiring things to deal with, and personally I don't know if I'd bother. Down the line I'm going to do a PD swap in this same car, so I actually will be bothering now I think about it. But for this series, keeping it simple and getting the car back on the road as quick as I can, we're just going to go for a plain and simple 1Z or an AHU. In my case, an AHU. If you can, realistically, you're best off getting a full donor car. There's going to be a lot of little things that you maybe wish you had or could have done with, or you can adapt to fit a Mark II and would just make life a bit easier. And there's nothing worse than getting what you think is everything and then it turns out there's one key part missing, and it's a nightmare. And then you have to go find that one part, but it turns out everybody wants that one part and you just can't find it anywhere, and or they don't make it anymore, and looking at you, 1.3 speedo cable. So just if you can, get a full donor car. So what donor car are you looking for? Well, you could get a Mark III Golf like I am doing, or you could get yourself something like a Volkswagen Polo. I think a Polo at the time had a 1.9 TDI as well. But there aren't as many things you can take from the Polo and put into the Mark II. With the Golf Mark III, you can put the subframe over, you can do the struts, you can do the rear beam, you can put so many parts from a Mark III into a Mark II. It's insane actually, but you can't do this with any of the other stuff. So just bear that in mind when you're looking for a donor car. If you're looking to just take everything new out, then a Mark III Golf is really your way to go. But you can also get something like an Audi A4, the B5 I think, which was the one that was the really cool touring car in silver with the red rings on the side. However, the Audi is longitudinally mounted, which means so in your Golf, you're looking at your engine is sideways and you can see your spark or glow plugs all in a row, and the gearbox is to the right. However, in an Audi, your engine is longitudinally, which means you take it and you spin it around, and it's technically, I guess, the more conventional setup back in the day. I'd say there's a lot more transversely mounted engines now than there are, say, in the 60s or 70s or whatever, but means it's a bit more work for a Golf because it's not actually really meant to be longitudinal. The engine mounts are all completely different. It's the same base engine, but the mounts and everything are totally different, and it's just a bit extra work. I mean, if you can get one and you can get the mounts cheap enough, fair enough, but it is a bit of extra work. However, it does make it a lot easier for putting it into other things, such as the Mercedes Fintail. Connor, if you're watching this. And then you also have the Seat or the Skoda alternative. I think the Ibiza Mark II and Skoda Felicia. Probably the Felicia, the Fabia is later. Felicia was a really cool rally car. I always really liked the livery on that for some reason. I'm rambling. Anyway, so those are mostly your donor car options. However, Volkswagen 1.9 TDIs have been in everything from Volkswagen Golfs to Ford Galaxies and God knows what else. So quite a few vehicles have had these same engine codes, but for easiness, personally, just for the Mark II Golf, I will go for a Mark III Golf if you can. Now, once you have your donor car, you have to think about what I mentioned in the last video briefly, and that is the car that you have at the minute, meaning your Mark II Golf, and what year it is, whether it's CE1 or CE2. CE stands for Central Electric, and basically it means the wiring system in your Volkswagen. Not just the difference between like a couple of wires or whatever, it's the entire fuse box and every plug that goes into it. Now, there is a difference, but all hope isn't lost on which one you have, because all of the wires are, I'm pretty sure, like 90% at least, are actually the same color. So it's very easy to just cut and join with different plugs if you want. They all do roughly the same thing, they just look different. As you can probably guess, one is the earlier one, and it came in early Mark II Golfs. I think, now don't quote me on this because I've never had them, but I think they came on Mark I Golfs and T25s, vans. Don't quote me on that. I can only speak for Mark II Golfs for certainty, but the earlier Mark II Golfs came with CE1. So CE1 came on Golfs built between 1984, which is the first year of production, to around 1989. I want to say November 1989. Conveniently, probably around the time the wall fell, funnily enough. Maybe they decided, tell you what, we've worked out freedom, let's work out better electrical systems. Because the Mark II Golf production ended in 1991, there were some late registered 92s, I think it's 91 and 92, but because obviously more time has passed between 1984 and 1989 than 1989 to 1992, there are a lot more CE1 Golfs out there, so it's kind of worth your while if you haven't already got your Golf. It's probably worth your while knowing about CE1, because whilst yes, CE2 makes it easier, it's probably far easier to find a CE1. So I saw a video talking about how to tell if your Golf is CE2 or CE1, and straight away they got a load of wiring diagrams and started explaining if it looks like this and if it looks like that. And yep, fair enough, you can do that, but you know, you can actually tell if your Golf is CE1 or CE2 within 30 seconds. You just open the door of your car, you look in, you look for your hazard light switch and see, is it on the steering column or is it on the dash? Is it on the steering column? It's CE2. Is it on the dash? It's CE1. And it's really as simple as that. Now, of course, there's way more to it than that. Don't get me wrong, it's not as simple as, oh, the hazard light's there, it's obviously CE2. I mean, it is that, but that's a pretty quick and easy way to tell straight away, you know, without having to get the Haynes manual out, have a look through all the diagrams and see what it is. When we get to the episode where I'm actually swapping the looms over, then I'll get more in depth about showing you physically the difference between the CE1 and the CE2. But for the most part, these diagrams show you they are a different style, and you can tell by your hazard light switch. So as you can see, the difference mainly is in appearance. Now, CE2 has a much more modular and for some people a much easier to work with plug system, whereas the CE1 is a little bit higgledy-piggledy and all over the place. Different sized plugs, and one's here and one's way over there. There's no real structure. If you're going to start with a CE2 Mark II Golf like I did with my blue one, everything is literally plug and play, really. You unplug your Mark II plug, you plug the Mark III one in, job done. However, if you're going CE1 to CE2 like I am, you have a few different options as to how you can go ahead with it. Now you can swap the whole lot to CE2 and basically just have a 90 spec CE2 Mark II Golf, which is probably the easiest option really. and then you'll have a CE2 Mark II, I suppose. You can splice the wires from the CE2 into your CE1 fuse box, because as I said, most of them are actually the same colors and you can probably piece it together fairly handy. There's a lot of diagrams on the internet talking about the full pin layout of both fuse boxes. Or if you really want to be crazy and you've somehow found some extra room in your dash, you can actually run 2 fuse boxes if you really want, and put your CE2 plugs in that you need to run the engine, and then just keep your CE1 fuse box to do everything else. I don't know why you would, but you could. Or you can do what I'm going to do, and you can put the full CE2 loom into your CE1, but at the switch end of all of your wires, splice on your older plugs from the CE1, and then you have all the wires doing the same thing, but you get to keep your more retro looking indicator stocks and things like that. Because the indicator stocks and things are completely different between CE1 and CE2. So it's kind of a giveaway if you have, say, an 84 Golf and you have 90 spec indicator stocks, well, anybody can tell straight away something's not right. So what's the easiest and dirtiest way to do this swap? Do what I did with the blue one. And to be honest, I regret how I did it, but you can do it and you can probably do a better job. What I did was have a CE2 Mark II Golf, get a Mark III Golf donor car, take the engine and loom, keep your existing gearbox from the Mark II, which means you don't need to change your pedals or anything like that. Run a standard throttle pedal with the cable, and then we mounted the throttle pot in the scuttle, believe it or not, and ran the standard throttle cable all the way around, so the throttle cable was actually on the throttle pot, which meant when you moved the throttle, it moved the throttle pot. And yeah, you could have changed the pedal if you wanted, but I didn't know if I was ever going to change it back to a standard Mark II setup or not, so I thought this was a really cool way of keeping the existing stuff. However, now this whole setup isn't really ideal because the old Mark II gearbox doesn't have the longest legs, and it doesn't really like the power that the TDI can put out, and it sits at quite high revs when you're cruising on the motorway, which just isn't nice. It's not the best long-term way to do this, but it is a quick and dirty solution if you just want to get on the road with the TDI straight away and do all the other bits as you go along. It uses all your old engine mounts, no need for a different subframe, uses your old drive shafts, you don't change your diesel tank. It's pretty simple really, but as I said, I do regret it. You can do it if you want, but I would do it properly. That being said, while yes, you can do it that really simple way, I'm doing a fairly complicated way of doing it. It's a bit more work, not just because it's a CE1 Golf, but because I really want to do it right. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to take my CE1 Golf and have my donor Mark III. This is so confusing with all of these marks and Cs. My Mark III with my CE2 loom. I'm going to take the entire loom from the Mark III, the interior loom, the engine bay loom, and the lighting loom, and the fuse box, and the rear loom, everything. Now some people prefer to use the loom from a Passat B4, which is just better rooted in the engine bay for a Mark II, because it's kind of like a weird in-between of the Mark II and the Mark III. I don't know why, but for some reason parts from the B4 seem to just go straight into a Mark II but do Mark III things. Volkswagen, I have no idea. But things like the fuse box are on the same side as they are in the Mark III and stuff like that. It's tidier, you know. Now, it's entirely up to you. I'm not doing this, but I will tell you it's a lot less work. And if you want to throw money at your project, yeah, go ahead, go for it. Or if there's one just lying around, if you're a dubber, you probably have bits and pieces just lying around, then yep, fair enough. But for me, I just can't be bothered getting another loom. I'd sooner sit and make this one work than just go and buy another one, you know. I have too many other problems with the car that I need to spend money on to just spend money on that when I could just spend a bit more time on it and do it myself. So as I said earlier on the ways of doing this, I will be taking the Mark III loom and cutting the plugs off of the switches ends and putting on the older CE1 plugs. I'll either be cutting them off and putting on the earlier ones if they're a different shape, or if they're the same shape but the pins are just different, I'll depin them and swap them around. I'll show you that as I do that basically. I want to keep the retro look, and well, Mark III switches don't fit, so there you go. The alternative is I'd have to go and buy CE2 Mark II switches for everything, and it's money I don't need to spend. On a car that needs floors, I'm not going to start faffing around with extra switches, you know. Now I have heard, speaking of switches, I have heard that you do need to change the headlight switch for Mark II to the later CE2 Mark II. I don't know if there's a workaround on this, and I will discover it if there is one, and I will do it for the video. But as a fail-safe, I have ordered a new switch as well. So we'll see what we can do with that, whether I can depin it and change it or what I'll have to do, I don't know. But we'll do something. Speaking of adapting to fit, you're also going to need, if you want to keep your Mark II clocks, I mean you could just stick Mark III clocks in, but So if you want to keep your Mark II clocks, you're going to need a speedo cable from a 1.3 Mark II Golf. Now these are a lot harder to find than they used to be, because it turns out that, well, everybody uses them for every swap, be it a 1.8T, a VR6, a 1.9 TDI in my instance, because they don't have the gear on the end of the speedo cable thingy majiggy. The 1.3 one has a different fitting, and they're very hard to get, and I expect to spend maybe, believe it or not, possibly up to 40 quid for a brand new one. I managed to find a second hand one thankfully, so I'm good in that department. And that's only if you want to keep the Mark III gearbox, which I do. However, on that, and I'll get into it when I'm wiring, but if you keep your Mark II clocks, then you lose the sensor for the ECU to know what speed you're doing, so bear that in mind, you'll have to do something with that. Now, if you don't want to do what I'm doing, and you do just want a CE2 your Mark II, you're going to need a few things. See now why it's easier to go with a CE2 Mark II in the first place? You're going to need, minimum, you might need more, but minimum you're going to need indicator and wiper stocks. Now these are a different design and more importantly different plugs. They also have a hazard light switch on them, as I said. In fact, believe it or not, I have the CE1 stocks right here, and this is pure chance I happen to have these. And these are a much thinner design, whereas on the later one they're a lot thicker, and they would sit, how do they sit? So they sit something like this, and then your hazard light switch would be here on the top. So obviously these don't have that, so I can't believe I actually had those just sitting on my desk. But they don't just fit straight on. You're gonna need to get what I believe is called the steering column tube, and whatever way it is, it sits on differently than the standard one. Not too sure on that, but you need one. So yeah. Headlight switch and loom, as I said, apparently I'm going to need one. I mightn't be able to depin it, I'm not sure, but you will need to change it, and obviously it has a different wire going to it, so you need the mini loom for that. I have heard bad stories about somebody who plugged their CE1 headlight switch into their CE2 plug, or the other way around. I think it was the other way around. No, it wasn't. It was CE1 into CE2, and it started to smoke really badly and could probably catch fire. So don't do that. And then, to be quite honest, we probably as well as just getting the entire interior loom from a CE2 Mark II to cancel out any future problems. And realistically, if it's a CE2 loom for Mark II, it's probably newer than what you had, which means it's probably better stuff. If you're like me and your wires have been butchered to all hell, sometimes it's good to just start fresh. Right, that's enough wiring talk, I think. Let's have a breather and we'll talk about other stuff. I did tell you it was going to get nerdy. So let's talk about the drivetrain itself and how much of an upgrade this will actually be. So our base car here is a 1984 Mark II Golf 1.6 diesel. I've seen reports of anywhere from 40 to 55 horsepower, and they were fitted with, I haven't heard anything to the contrary, but they were fitted with either a 4-speed, a 4+E, which is like an overdrive, which really means a half gear, so it's not quite a full fit, but it just makes it a little bit quieter, or a full-blown 5-speed. I don't think I've ever heard of there being a automatic diesel. If there is, God help you. We will be upgrading to a 1.9 TDI, which straight out of the bat gives a minimum of 90 horsepower and can have very easy improvements to make it 100 plus. Now I know, 90 horsepower, wow, that's amazing. You have a 200 and something horsepower Subaru, this is nothing. Yes, but what you have to think about is that when your vehicle normally has 45 and you're going to 90, that's double the power. Double is a lot. When your numbers are already low, any improvement is an improvement. Not only a bit more power, but it's probably a lot more torque. I don't have torque figures, but you know, TDIs pull like a train, so. And when combined with the gearbox from the Mark III, the O2A gearbox, it has much longer legs, it cruises better, and it'll increase the fuel economy, which was already good. We should be seeing around 60 miles per gallon, realistically, and apparently about 700 litres to a tank. Now, the Mark III will get 55 miles per gallon and weighs about 200 kilograms more than a Mark II. Now, Mark III is a bit more sleek and aerodynamic, but you know, 200 kilograms is 200 kilograms. Although the amount of rust proofing and stuff I'm going to be putting onto this one probably weighs about the same and cancels it out, but hey ho. Now, speaking of that gearbox, it comes down to how you want to do it. You can keep your standard Mark II box, which is known as the 020 box, which I mentioned earlier, and it'll bolt right up to your TDI engine because the bolt holes are the exact same. Means you don't have to mess around with your pedals, you don't have to mess around with changing from hydraulic to cable clutch, or other way around. There's just not as much messing around. However, it will rev quite high in my experience, as that's what I have in my blue Mark II, and it's just really not ideal for cruising. I am told, however, though, that you can bolt up the gearbox from a 1.9 turbo diesel or straight diesel Mark III Golf, or a Volkswagen Caddy or Seat Inca or whatever, and it's the same 020 rod change box, but has longer gearing, so that could be the better option. I'm not sure. A mate of mine has one in his GTI and he says it's much better for cruising in, so there you go. This time, no, compared to the blue one, I'll be taking the gearbox as well from the donor car, and is probably the proper way to do this really. This one is what's known as an O2A gearbox and has a cable change as opposed to a rod change. This means there's a much more modern feel to your gear change, and if you have a Mark II Golf as worn out as mine, it means that when you go for first you probably won't get reverse, and the gears just aren't all over the place like an old Land Rover, so there's that. But this is not a nice simple bolt in and go. There's quite a bit of drilling and fettling with the likes of the pedal box and getting the cables to fit and stuff. And the gearbox itself will bolt in, yeah, but not just about the gearbox itself. Suspension really is down to your own discretion, to be honest. You can keep your standard, or you can upgrade to, say, GTI units if you don't have a GTI, or you can just take everything from the Mark III if you have one. As I just want to be done with everything in this, I'm just taking everything from the Mark III because everything in mine is, shall we say, tired. I would be replacing a lot of it with new, but it will be new Mark III stuff. Now, I can't speak as to whether this is all possible if you get a different donor car than a Mark III, but that's on you to do the research on that. But if you want to know the bare minimum on what you need to get your TDI to run realistically, you'll need this. You'll need your engine and box, you'll need the ECU, you'll need your engine loom, possibly the interior loom, but definitely the engine loom, the immobilizer box, or you can get your ECU de-immobilized, the throttle pot, which is the thing that your throttle pedal actually moves to tell the engine to rev, because obviously this TDI doesn't have a physical throttle. The diagnostic port for you to plug in your VAGCOM and clear your codes and stuff like that, and likely the clocks from your donor car, because it'll tell you straight away whether you have any faults, and then, you know. So you can see now why I'm saying you're better just to get a full donor car, because there's so many different things you could need. You're best just to have them. And the way this is going at the minute, to be quite honest, it's nearly as cheap to get a donor car as it is to buy an engine by itself, so you know, there is that too. And if you're like me, you can sell off some of the parts from that donor car to try and recoup some of the costs. Now, I hope this hasn't been too much of a total nerd fest, but there were just some things I had to go a bit more in depth about, and with the weather being like this, I really couldn't do much else, and I wanted to get something out there to let you guys know this series is happening. So, you know, a million different ways to do this swap, and a million different things you might need, but I'll show you for definite what I'm going to use, and hopefully it'll help you out as we go along. So, that was a lot. So join me in the next episode next week, where the aforementioned promised the car will be on the spit will actually happen, and I'll show you how the car looks. I'll be honest, I have quite a bit of bodywork to do underneath before we actually get stuck into this TDI swap, but I'll show you some of the footage of the car actually being made solid again. I've been Tomo Patterson. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Tomo Patterson. Be sure to follow Connor on Instagram at Hughes Corporation. Check us out on Facebook at 427 Motorsports. Check us out on TikTok at 427 Motorsports. Check out our web store, which I keep bloody forgetting to plug, but it's there. 427motorsports/store. Any purchases made on the store go directly to us and go into our bills. So it's our own form of sponsorship in a way. So we don't have a Patreon or anything like that. So if you could check out our store, maybe buy a t-shirt or something, it goes into this build. Oh, and also, we've so many bloody things to plug. Be sure to check us out on Spotify if you're looking at a podcast where me and Connor talk crap about cars for like an hour or so and do our own mini used car challenges as if we were better than we are. So yeah, thanks very much. Leave us a thumbs up, a comment, and we'd love it if you could subscribe and share the word. So thanks very much and good luck.